promised an end to the Great Depression and also stressed racial doctrines like anti-Semitism. They also avoided class division, but they mostly appealed to the lower middle class, and only a few people defended the Democratic Party, and most of the others supported the Nazi Party. And Paul von Hindenburg ended up offering Hitler chancellorship, which he accepted, and Hitler promised a German Reich. The Nazis eliminated the working class, liberal opposition, and other political parties. They took away civil and constitutional rights, and Germany ended up being a centralized state. Hitler also prohibited trade unions, collective bargaining, strikes, and lockouts. They promoted racial superiority and purity, and the Nazis introduced eugenics that improved the quantity and quality of the German race. There is no room for racially inferior or biological outsiders, and the Nazis campaigned to increase birth of racially valuable children. The Nazis downgraded the role of women to only wives and mothers, and they created tax credits, special child allowances, and marriage loans to encourage marriage and procreation. Husbands can only divorce their wives if they are sterile. Abortions were outlawed. Birth control centers were closed. Birth control was restricted, and info about family planning was hard to obtain. The Nazis published pro-natalist propaganda, but Germany's plan to increase births failed because the birth rate was still under replacement level. Quality of children were the Nazis' biggest concern. Sterilization for men and women who had hereditarily determined sicknesses were initiated. For example, schizophrenia, manic depression, chronic alcoholism, and physical deformities. 30,000 ended up being made sterile. Euthanasia killed 200,000 men, women, and children. The Nazis killed whoever were deemed useless by gassing, injections, and starvation. And Nazi eugenics led to the extermination of the racially inferior, and anti-Semitism was key to designing a new racial order. In 1933, the Nazis wanted to segregate the Jewish population. They used religious descent to determine who was a Jew, and laws were made to humiliate, impoverish, and segregate the Jewish. And in 1935, the Nuremberg laws were made to deprive the Jewish of their citizenship and prohibit them from marriage and sexual intercourse with other Germans. The official goal was Jewish emigration. In the 1930s, thousands of Jews left Germany, and in November 9th through 10th, 1938, Kristallnacht took place. It's when the Nazis destroyed Jewish stores and synagogues and killed more than 100 people.
I'm Juan.
And I'm Blake.
This is Chapter 36, Nationalism and Political Identities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
Okay. After the Paris Peace settlements, Asian countries like Japan, India, and China gained nationalist ideas for an independent and self-sufficient government and state. They were influenced by European national ideals and ideologies.
3 examples of this would be India, China, and Japan. India struggled with oppression from the British rule and afterwards faced division between Hindus and Muslims. In China, there was civil war separating between nationalist and communist parties, and Japan struggled with militaristic expansion over China. Nationwide communication in India supported the idea of national unity by bringing people together across the country. They were also influenced by European ideologies of democracy, individual freedom, and equality, which helped us promote the idea of nationalist movements.
Associations were dedicated to the struggle against British rule. For example, the Indian National Congress, founded in 1885, which had the support of prominent Hindus and Muslims in collaboration with the British to self-rule to India, and the Muslim League, established in 1906 with the encouragement of the British government self-rule.
However, the British government responded to both with harsh retaliation.
Indian nationalists joined the struggle for Indian self-rule from British oppression. Indian nationalists like Mahatma Gandhi joined with peaceful protests and ideologies of a new state for Indian self-rule and independence. He set up peaceful protests to show his uncooperation with the British government, and the British responded with violence, which gave the Indians moral superiority.
Gandhi helped lead the Indian National Congress through two mass movements, the non-cooperation movement of 1920 to 1922 and the civil disobedience movement of 1930. He also led boycotts against British industries inside of India. However, the British retaliated in 1919 in the city of Azmarashtar by killing 379 demonstrators.
After years of hesitation and deliberation, the British government finally gave India self-rule with the Government of India Act, institutionalized a self-governing state in India, allowed for the establishment of autonomous legislative bodies in the provinces of British India, and the creation of bicameral national legislature, and the formation of an executive arm under the control of the British government.
However, unequal economic distribution caused by the Great Depression caused Muslims to fear Hindu economic control in the government and society. So Al-Jinnah proposed the creation of Pakistan, a Muslim state controlled independently by Muslims. A nationalist revolution in 1911 forced the Qiangyang Emperor to abdicate the throne. This caused the fall of the Qing Empire in China. Dr. Sun Yat-sen replaced him and formed a new republic in 1912. However, provincial rulers known as warlords controlled regional areas of land.
After the Great War, nationalist settlement developed rapidly in China, especially in youths and intellectuals who hoped for foreign interference to be gone from China and to get rid of the unfair treaties put on by the Japanese.
Some Chinese became interested in the idea of communism and Marxism and created their own communist party, known as the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, which was created in 1921. Sun Yat-sen, however, became a prominent leader in the nationalist movement. He also wrote The Three Principles of the People.
The nation and bring China under Kuomintang rule. In doing so, he faced three major threats. He only controlled a part of China, in which the rest was controlled by warlords. He always faced the threat of communist revolution, led by Mao Zedong, and the current Japanese aggression towards Manchuria.
Following World War I, Japan signed the Washington Conference Treaties in 1922, in which Japan agreed to limit naval development, pledged to evacuate Shandong province of China, and guaranteed China's territorial integrity. And in 1928, they also signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which renounced war as an instrument of national policy. However, following 1918, Japan was faced with the Great Depression, which caused an economic downturn in Japan.
The public demanded for political and social reforms but were blocked off past the suffrage law of 1925. Citizens were frustrated and led a revolution against the corrupt government. They wanted the preservation of Japanese culture and the eradication of Western influences. They started militaristic, self-sufficient Japanese ideals and wanted to take over China.
On September 18, 1931, Japanese troops used explosives to blow up a few rail on South Manchuria Railway north of Mukden. They blamed this on the Chinese and used it as a pretext to invade China. And by 1932, Japanese troops had controlled all of Manchuria and established the puppet state of Manchukuo.
The Kuomintang Party in China appealed to the League of Nations of Japanese aggression. Japan responded by leaving the League of Nations and continued to embark on conquest in East Asia.
Colonial empires in Togo, Cameroon, German Southwest Africa, and German East Africa. Africans in these territories faced direct conflict in the military campaign, as many of them were forced to fight alongside the Allied and Central Powers during the war.
As the war dragged on, European presence in colonies thinned. Africans took the opportunity to stage armed uprisings and other forms of protest. Major inspirations for these revolts were resentment and hatred towards colonialists. No matter the cause, colonial authorities responded ruthlessly and succeeded in putting down all the revolts.
Following World War I, African self-sufficiency had declined and required European investment in infrastructure. This resulted in the creation of port facilities, railroads, railways, and telegraph wires and communication networks previously not available.
To boost the economy, Africans took on cash crop farming and mining. However, this was done during forced labor practices imposed on them by the white settlers.
In World War I, Africa was not met with sovereignty or self-determination, but instead the consolidation of colonial powers. This led to the promotion of the ideology of African nationalism. New African elites were established as Africans began to improve economy through better education and higher paying jobs, which were gained through education in European style education systems and adaptation to European culture.
National identity took many forms, including identities based on race, ethnicity, religion, and language. Many nationalists also preached the idea of Pan-Africanism, which preached Black pride. Also, collectively, these ideas influenced the development of nationalist movements during the 30s and 40s, and these ideas translated into demands for independence from colonialism.
The Great War, Russian Revolution, and Mexican Revolution helped spread radical ideas and the promise of new political possibilities throughout Latin America. They were promoted by the idea of Enlightenment-derived liberalism that helped spread the idea of independence movements. Another growing influence was universities, which helped taught ideas from revolutions in Russia and Mexico.
Radicalism took many formations, including communism and other rebellious agendas. However, political parties were created to discourage these other political forms. As the war dragged on, European presence in colonies thinned. Africans took the opportunity to stage armed uprisings and other forms of protest. Major inspirations for these revolts were resentment and hatred towards colonialists. No matter the cost, colonial authorities responded ruthlessly and succeeded in putting down all the revolts.
Following World War I, African self-sufficiency had declined and required European investment in infrastructure. This resulted in the creation of port facilities, railroads, railways, and telegraph wires and communication networks previously not available.
To boost the economy, Africans took on cash crop farming and mining. However, this was done during forced labor practices imposed on them by the white settlers.
In World War I, Africa was not met with sovereignty or self-determination, but instead the consolidation of colonial powers. This led to the promotion of the ideology of African nationalism. New African elites were established as Africans began to improve economy through better education and higher paying jobs, which were gained through education in European-style education systems and adaptation to European culture.
National identity took many forms, including identities based on race, ethnicity, religion, and language. Many nationalists also preached the idea of Pan-Africanism, which preached Black pride. Also, collectively, these ideas influenced the development of nationalist movements during the 30s and 40s, and these ideas translated into demands for independence from colonialism.
The Great War, Russian Revolution, and Mexican Revolution helped spread radical ideas and the promise of new political possibilities throughout Latin America. They were promoted by the idea of Enlightenment-derived liberalism that helped spread the idea of independence movements. Another growing influence was universities, which helped taught ideas from revolutions in Russia and Mexico.
Radicalism took many formations, including communism and other rebellious agendas. However, political parties were created to discourage these other political forms. Military and landed elites in Latin America contained these rebellious movements, but the cultural and political popularity of radicalism persisted.
U.S. began to dominate export-oriented economies in Latin America by providing large-scale investments. And in 1912, William Howard Taft provided the policy of dollar diplomacy, which allowed U.S. to provide large-scale investments and avoid military confrontations.
The Great Depression demonstrated how involved Latin America was in the world economy. U.S. investments were not able to be maintained during this economic downturn. Also, agricultural products and raw materials were vulnerable to effects of depression. However, this allowed Latin American countries to experiment with other forms of economies, such as the industrial economy and urban development.
New good neighbor policies established in the 1920s and 30s required the U.S. to extradite military forces and use U.S. Marines to train local indigenous police forces to maintain and control their countries. However, this was threatened in Nicaragua when Augusto Cesar Sandino opposed this.
As a part of a plan for U.S. forces to be removed from Nicaragua, they trained the National Guard there to make sure opposition forces did not take control of the government. Also, during this good neighbor policy, the Secretary of State, Gordon Hull, attended the 7th International Conference of American States in Montevideo, Uruguay. He signed the Convention of the Rights of Duties of States, which meant that no state had the right to interfere in internal or external affairs of another. However, right after this occurred, Lázaro Cárdenas, the president of Mexico, nationalize the oil industry, which lost a lot of money from U.S. and British investors.
One of the major things